So we don't get too far behind as you're taking your seats. I just want to take a minute to welcome everyone. I'm Michael Delle Carpini. I'm the dean here at the Annenberg School, and I'd like to welcome you all to the University of Pennsylvania's Annenberg School for Communication. Just wanted to say a word that when I first became dean, now 11 years ago, I became part of what was arguably the best communication program in the country. But when I looked around, one of the areas that I thought there was room for improvement, significant room for improvement really, was our lack of focus on global issues. The field of communication, the application of communication is a global phenomenon. Sometimes we forget that in the United States. And so I was lucky enough, or we were lucky enough, to convince Monroe Price to join our faculty, and through the work that he did and the building of his Center for Global Communication Studies, we really began to move in a direction at a rapid pace that put us at the intersection of global communication issues. Thanks in part to the work that Monroe did, we were able to add a host of new faculty whose focus was not on the United States alone, but on more global and comparative and international issues. People like Deborah Moeller, Guowen Yang, Sandra Gonzalez-Bailon, and Marwan Crady. I'm happy to report that there was enough energy and activity because of these hires and because of the work of Monroe that we now have a new initiative focused on global communication issues, and that is the Project for Advanced Research in Global Communication. Thanks to the hard work of Marwan, this new initiative, which I believe in the packet you have is described, so I won't go into a lot of detail, promotes theoretical and empirical innovation in the study of communication in public life. It aims to stimulate critical conversations between disciplines and on emerging issues in worldwide communication. And it is focused on bringing our graduate students into that process as collaborators in our better understanding of global communications. PARG hosts a symposium every year, but since it's a new initiative, this is actually the inaugural symposium for PARG. And I'm very excited to be here for this important moment at the Annenberg School. Looking at the topic and the lineup for today's symposium, but even more tangibly looking around this room, gives me great confidence that these faculty-led efforts are succeeding in making Annenberg a truly global program. So I look forward to the conversation that is about to start and from learning from the scholars assembled here. And I'll hand over the platform to Marwan Crady, the Anthony Shadid Chair in Global Media, Politics, and Culture, and the Director of the Project for Advanced Research in Global Communication. Thank you.
So I want to begin by welcoming you. I also want to think a little bit to thank everybody who's been involved in this, and everybody here has been involved in one shape or the other, so I thank you all, but there are other people I also need to thank. It is remarkable to think that just a year ago this was just an idea. It was literally just an idea that I was discussing with the dean and with some of my colleagues. And the mission was never in doubt, but a lot of details and logistical things needed to happen. And they only happened because we have an incredible group of students, staff, and faculty. So let me just very briefly thank the important people in the process. So chief among them is the chief, our dean. Michael's vision has been critical for PARC. He's been a great mentor in the preparation stage, but also in the launch stage. Michael, I want to thank you for your very genuine support for this and your active engagement in PARC. It really means a lot to me. I also wanted to thank many colleagues for what I call random acts of guidance in the hallways, in formal meetings, over coffee, over wine. I'll just go through the list. Joe Thoreau, Carolyn Marvin, Joe Capella, Victor Picard, and others. Barbie Zalitzer, Bob Hornick, and Monroe Price direct their own programs, so they've been critical in kind of showing, leading by example. I also want to thank Kathleen Hall-Jameson, who's the director of the Annenberg Public Policy Center, for inviting us to use this beautiful space. I also want to thank the formidable staff we have here at Annenberg. Lots of fires erupted in the last few weeks, and they put them off very competently. I want to start with Deb Williams, our Director of Special Events. She helped us make this a special event in many ways. Deb Porter, the building manager, along with Kevin Thorpe, helped with all logistics, and there were lots of logistics. Joe DiOrio, our director of communication, helped spread the word about this. I want to also thank Rich Cardona, who's here with us. He's the director of IT for the Annenberg School, along with Phil McClelland, Waldo Aguirre, Kyle Cassidy, who's taking pictures, and Gabe Hargroves, who's also here. They made sure we could hear each other today. We could see the videos. They made sure we will have a record of this event, so I want to thank them. I also quickly want to thank Yogi Sukwa at Finance, with Donna Edwards and Kelly Anderson, who taught me the details of budget management. I also want to thank our librarian, Sharon Black, who I believe is with us, and along with Minzong. Sharon kept a stream of articles and books and links coming my way, and that's why some of you are here today, because many of the people who are speaking today don't know each other personally. We know each other through our work, and librarians keep us aware of each other's work, among other people. I also want to thank a variety of people who helped in small and big ways. Kelly Fernandez, Donna Burdomi, Emily Plowman, Briar Smith, Tej Patel, Liz Cooper, Eric Bowden, Laura Henderson, Joanne Murray, Rose Halligan, Andrea Bloom. They all gave regular advice. Karen Riley helped us coordinate logistics here. When I told you it took a village, I really meant it. I didn't leave anyone unpestered in these two buildings. Many PhD students also contributed to what became PARC over the last few years. I want to thank them all, but I want to single out a few who helped with logistics today, who volunteered to help with logistics. Rosemary Clark, Katrina Girginova, Sarah Murad, Samantha Oliver, Aaron Shapiro, and Kate Zambon. Thank you very much. I see some of you in the back. Feel free to move to the front. I want to thank our speakers, some of whom have traveled very far, several time zones away, for joining us today. I want to thank our moderators who agreed to join us on a pretty last-minute invitation, for sharing their expertise and especially their timekeeping skills. So every speakers get 15 to 20, and by 15 to 20 we mean 15 to 20. So finally, I want to thank Marina Krikorian. Marina has somehow managed to coordinate all this stuff, the travel and the food and the technology and the printing and the exhibit. Many moving parts. She's done it all pretty much on her own with the help of everybody else, but she was the keynote coordinating all this. So where's Marina? Marina, thank you very much for this. So let's give everybody a big hand. Thank you. A couple of things. The back cover of your brochure has all the information. If you want to add to the chatter, follow us on social media. Those of you tweeting, we're PARC 14 today. Please tweet up a storm if you can. I also want to mention that we have a small exhibition of graffiti going on at the Annenberg School building on the second floor plaza. It's called Before This, It Was Just a Wall. So during breaks, feel free to drift. You have 10 to 15 minutes to drift there and drift back here. But also our reception this evening will be there. Now, the popular rebellions that have swept Arab countries since December 2010 have spawned an active sphere of insurrectionary cultural production. Though media harnessed by these revolutionaries include graffiti, street art, public space, puppetry, poetry, theater, songs, cartoons, digital arts, music videos, singing, most analyses have hitherto focused on social media as digital platforms. This focus on technology has, I think, limited our understanding of how revolutionaries have represented themselves, their demands, their opponents, limited our understanding of the myth, of the ideologies, of histories that inspired their slogans, their murals, and their poems, and made them historically resonant and politically potent. Theories of the public sphere have usually not been concerned with revolutionary times, with very few, and very passing exceptions. Just take an example. Think of what theories of the public sphere typically think of images. I would argue that many theories of the public sphere are iconoclastic. They desire to control images. They're anxious about images. Dewey famously wrote in The Public and Its Problems that vision is a spectator hearing a participator. So they lament the proliferation of mediated images at the expense of what they think is local conversation. Perhaps more famously, in The Structural Transformation of the Public Sphere, Jürgen Habermas propounded an iconoclastic critical rationality, wary of the ability of images to turn citizens into passive spectators. Besides, I think in what is perhaps the most well-known criticism of Habermas, he really focused on white male bourgeois deliberation against an assumed backdrop of social peace and social order. This is not the context we're dealing with. Even in later work, when Dewey and Habermas found redeeming value in images, and some images, like bourgeois art, for instance, their theories of the public still prefer to be uncontaminated by any kind of emotion-triggering images or songs or lyrical endeavors. I think in contrast, we have theories of the public sphere that do emphasize affect and style and contention that perhaps would be more helpful for us today. A few examples, Martha Nussbaum's work on how emotions affect people's social and political judgments, Lauren Berlant's work on affective public, and of course Michael Warner's work on publics and counterpublics, which redefines the public sphere as a space of circulation. So the social and political life of the revolutionary public sphere of the Arab Uprising, I think, is an auspicious opportunity to expand and critique these theories. The shared assumption of a relatively stable political system as a backdrop for public sphere theory is showing its limits, I think, and needs to be provincialized. Even among those of us who have written extensively about the Arab public sphere, and many of us are here today, that maddeningly complex phenomenon in which the national and the transnational mix, religion, sexuality, politics, and commerce jostle for influence, all haunted by competing historical narratives, as a space of contention, we never imagined that the revolution would even compel us to reconsider what it means to be in contentious politics. So in short, even works that envision the public sphere as a space of contentious performative bodies usually do not account for violent and radical upheaval, structural, political, economic upheaval. Though the substantive work on contestation during the French Revolution provides a rich historical toolkit, it is rarely explicitly concerned with conceptualizing the public sphere. The revolutionary public sphere is therefore under-theorized, the notion. Now, the revolutionary public sphere, the symposium today, the book that's coming out of this later, and the project that's going to be ongoing for a few years, I hope, seeks to fill this gap. Though contributors today have not been explicitly tasked with elaborating a theory of the revolutionary public sphere, I think together the papers lay some foundations for such an undertaking. This event seeks to understand the kind of aesthetic experimentation and stylistic innovation in this revolutionary public sphere, to elucidate how tactical playfulness builds up to potent strategic dissent. To ask the question, does it in fact build up to that? I think more specifically, we strive to shed light on the ways in which various actors, labor activists, media workers, artists, poets, clerics, writers, regular people, hopeful, angry citizens, have attracted, upheld, and directed popular attention to themselves, to their opponents. They created and mobilized publics, stirred and channeled affects. Together, we hope to address questions such as how did these creators represent, refract, and subvert events in narratives of the popular revolutions, of the popular demonstrations and political struggles that lay ahead. As the uprisings have moved into new phases of complexity, and some of them new phases of violence, how have styles and repertoires morphed in this rapidly changing, sometimes lethal environment? What hybrids emerge when folklore blends in with digital media? Does revolutionary cultural production privilege certain genres? Does it have distinctive tonalities, distinctive intensities? How do drama, satire, and tragedy and comedy relate to each other in this space? How do graffiti, poems, songs, videos, pictures, and jokes emerge, circulate, attract, repulse, make sense? Can we speak of a revolutionary aesthetic at large? So I think in keeping with PARGC's mission, what this does is really puts into I don't want to use the word dialogue anymore, into a productive contention, the same people who are trained, who have deep, intimate knowledge of the sites they are studying, but who also are interested in theory constructions. In other words, the kind of work that stems from very solid, deep empirical knowledge that is also not only theoretically minded, but theoretically mindful. So throughout the day, we will tackle the textual, the oral, the visual, the historical, the contemporary, the high-tech and the low-tech, the dirty and the glossy, the nudge and the punch in the face. You will notice that our speakers come from a variety of fields. You can look at the program, from art criticism to drama, to anthropology, sociology, communication, literature. You will also notice, in line with PARGC's mission to mentor early career scholars, that most of our scholars are doctoral and postdoctoral academics. So It is this debate that I invite you to participate in today. I'd like to invite the first panel to the stage. Thank you.
Welcome to the first panel. I'm your moderator, William Yeomans of George Washington University. And the first panel this morning is on music, memory, and contention. Our first speaker, we will follow the order that's in the brochure. Our first speaker is Yakin Abdulmajid, and he is speaking on precarious improvisations, the mediations and circulations of alternative music production. He's a third-year cultural anthropology PhD student at Duke University. We're planning to give each speaker around 17 minutes so that we have a little more time for Q&A. If each gets 20, then that only leaves 10 minutes for Q&A. So I will try to enforce the time diligently.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. Today I will talk about, today I will talk about the choir project in Egypt. It's basically an independent music network. It started in May 2010 by 3 Egyptians who are like non-musicians. They were inspired by a Finnish complaints choir, which basically suggests that instead of complaining, people can just meet, gather, write songs collectively, and sing. So instead of complaining, singing, they performed their first performance in May 2010. It was successful, and so they started to expand into new cities, reorganize workshops, and so on. So just to give you an idea, here's the process. The members meet or discuss the next theme for the workshop. So they come with an idea, like just an idea, like let's think about proverbs, advertisements, newspapers, and then they create a call for participants on social media, Facebook, YouTube, and so on. Because there is no musical background or artistic background required, anyone can join. And so there's such kind of diversity of social backgrounds of participants joining the workshop. Then they plan a workshop for 5 or 7 days where actually they meet, write songs, melodies, lyrics. They do it by themselves. Musicians and non-musicians, artists and non-artists. And then they perform the songs of the workshop and also songs from earlier workshops in a concert that usually takes place just the next day after the workshop. So also note that members come and go, participants are always different, so each performance is usually unique and different. So there's also no hierarchy or central management in this group. Like there's no leader or a committee or anything. It's usually functioning in a very deliberative way. And through the last 3 years, it expanded to several cities, Alexandria, Minya, also some of the Egyptian members organized workshops in Amman, Beirut, Paris, London, and so on. Total number of those who participated in this choir is 1,500. In Egypt, there are about 300 members. So one interesting thing about this project is that it has been usually framed by mass media as a political art project, performing political music. But the members of this choir network usually refuse that and reject it. They say, we're not artists, we're not making great art, and we're not political at all. We are not singing political songs. We actually reflect on our social lives, which has politics in it. So basically, what is the choir network? What is the choir project if it is neither art nor politics? How can we understand it, and so on? To give you just an idea of what I'm talking about, so this is an idea of what is the choir project. But also, one thing there are 2 things I'm trying to do here. First is that I want to move from the idea of the revolution as a sudden event, as a chronological frontier, and think about the background of this. What has been happening before that? What's the background in which the revolution is situated? That's one thing. Another thing is, I want to move beyond the semantic model of analyzing art and cultural production in the Middle East. Beyond what does the text mean to how the text is done, and what does it do? What kind of affected registers produce it, and how does it affect, basically? So I will go through two themes in this presentation. One is the process of production itself, the compositions that take place in the choir workshop, and then I'll talk about the mediations, the aesthetic forms of the choir songs. So basically, here's what happens in the workshop. Participants come from diverse social backgrounds. They have only a title, a theme. The first workshop I attended in this ethnographic work was a workshop called Either You or Me, Yana Yanta, or Either Me or You. So just went there, found lots of people I didn't know, go through an isolated phase, use yourself, and so on. And then we start with this kind of title. We divide ourselves into groups. We just meet into, like, say, so we were about 50, we meet into groups of 8, we just spit words. What would Yana Yanta mean? Either me or you mean? Which is about othering, about the other, and so on. We spit words. We suggest themes. We can invent melodies. We discuss it. And then we gather once again in the bigger group. We share it. We augment words. We add things and so on. And through iterations, we meet again. We sing collectively the sound with the lines and so on. If it doesn't sound right, okay, let's remove this word, add this word. But this would change the rhythmic quality of the verse, for example. Okay, so add this line and so on. So basically, the production of songs here depends on crafting lines, melodies, and improvisation into an active and iterative process. Rhythms, metaphors, allegories, tunes, and harmonies are not intended as much as they emerge from suggestions, discussions, and revelations. Out of a heap of ideas, feelings, scattered words, statements, proverbs, idioms, bricolage of lines and melodies are formed by connections and augmentations. Then lines are scattered, words are tweaked again. So basically, there's no signification. It's not about the representation, right? It's about improvisation into action that has an effect of something. This is an idea. This is just an idea of the process itself. So basically, this is one of the sessions in which, like, people meet, just sing, like, we have, like, these girls out there just, like, singing a different melody. Some people just, like, go to the mic, spit new words, and so on. But we know from musicologists and anthropology of music that improvisations are not spontaneous. Improvisations are structured. There's a genre, there's a form, there's some kind of cultivated dispositions that inform such kind of improvisation. Improvisations pushes forward the fuzzy fringes of a genre, of an aesthetic form, but it is already structured by some kind of a background, right? So what I'm arguing here is that the producers of the choir project are actually coming, their improvisations are informed by already shared popular culture of everyday life in Egypt. The soundscape of what they share, the idioms, the films, the argots, the music of Egyptian popular culture. So this is another thing. So you have this kind of like background, shared background. The last thing I would talk about in this process is that the aesthetic qualities of the production of the choir performances depends on like vocal ranges, differences in vocalities, harmonies, and so on. And basically, these kind of differences are not presupposed. We discover them in the choir workshop themselves through sociality and friendship ties and realizations about each of us throughout the workshop. So basically what happens in the workshop is that you actually realize things about yourself, about your voice, about what you can do, about your words, about the melodies you can produce, and others. And within this process, you know yourself, you know others, but also you have to attune to others. So you have really people from diverse background, but to have a performance, to produce song, they have to attune in such kind of difference. I call it attunement in difference. So in effect, the compositions and performance and songs depend on this process of attunement in difference, where participants realize themselves and their differences, but synchronize their performance, attune to each other's differences, and maybe highlight it, adapt to disagreements, mistakes, and dissonances by continuously finding a level of attunement once again. This kind of attunement in difference is not just important because it helps to compose melodies and so on, but it's so important in recovery, in handling mistakes, when someone forgets a line in a performance, when there's someone with really amazing improvisation solo in the performance, and so the choir leave more space for the improvisation to go on and move slowly to a new transition and so on. Oh my God. So now I want to talk about the aesthetic forms of the choir songs themselves. So as a general argument, I argue that the choir songs do not make claims that ask questions. Choir songs do not provide answers than reveal ambiguities. The choir songs do not take positions than invite to share the fuzziness of everyday life. The choir songs mediate through structure of oppositions crafted in the lyrics, melodies, and sounds, an opposition inherited from the initial form of the Cairo Complaints choir, the first project, which is the opposition between complaining and singing. Okay? So, I want to take one example of a song called You Pharaoh, to show this kind of opposition and ambiguity. It was first performed in December 2010, about 2 months before the revolution, and the first three verses starts talking about the tyrant, the pharaoh, all of the lines of the song are cited from famous Egyptian proverbs. So the first three verses are talking about the tyrant, the toil in Egypt, the exhaustion, the boredom, the subjection, the normalization of subjection, and so on. And then, in the fourth verse, something different happened. There's a completely different transition. Let's see it. first line, it is coming after you, the flood, is repeated 15 times. It is anticipated. The flood is that which will change and destroy everything. It seems disastrous, but it is coming. And when the flood of the night comes, put your child under and stand on him, emphasize this meaning of crisis. And then the vocalist adds, the flood has arrived, and the chorus replies, welcome, welcome flood. But the tufan, which is also the flood, which is also al-tufan, which is the flood in English, is also a famous toilet flush Egyptian brand. So when the chorus says we will be shit in a toilet, that's why it is witty and humorous. But here's the point. Everyday life is boring, exhausting, and frustrating. The flood, a change is anticipated. It is happening. But what would the flood change? It is disastrous. Is it disastrous or promising? Who would be flushed in a toilet? Who would be saved? There's ambiguity here. The first 3 verses at the beginning of the song leads us to expect that there is a change needed, is promising, and maybe aspired for. But what change? No one knows. How? No one knows. The future is both promising and also dreadful. There's another important thing here in this song. The mutilation of melodies and sounds themselves. So, for example, that fun, like the first, I'm kind of losing the track. So, that fun. This melody is actually cited from a very famous Egyptian children's song called So actually, and it is like really aired in any kind of national occasion and so on. It is a festive children's song. Okay. It's a festive children's song. It carries this kind of festivity, happiness, joy, and so on. And also the second part, which is it's cited from the melodies of Abd al-Muttalib's famous song which is also about festivity, happiness, and so on. The line itself from Ramadan Gana Ramadan is also from a very famous comedy play. The kids have grown up in 80s. Here I'm talking about like how there's a usage of an opposition between disaster, crisis, and also festivity and happiness. And the point here is that how the song reveal and share these kind of ambiguities and contradictions of everyday life using such kind of oppositions. Okay, why are the choir songs really effective? I argue that basically this is because there is an appeal to the aesthetically tuned audience of who are already sharing the everyday life and popular culture of Egypt. So basically, because the producers are themselves coming from the audience, there is such kind of ordinariness that makes them share such kind of aesthetically tuned dispositions and tastes. As a conclusion, just what I'm suggesting here is that actually the choir project is, although it's like that the members are refusing to be categorized as political art project, because actually they are suggesting an alternative sense of what is art and what is political. In a sense, the choir project suggests what Deleuze called the styling. The idea that art is the styling of one's life with others. That art is a practice of ordinary life itself. That it is about this kind of making worlds and worlds within life itself. But also style, for Deleuze and Guattari, is the form of what they call minoritarian politics. There's the majority politics, politics that works according to a model, grand mainstream politics. There is the minority politics, which is resistance of everyday life from below, but like a force of negation. But there is beyond this kind of subjection and negation, there is what is called minoritarian politics, which is the creativity, the power of creativity, the power of creating a style, the power of suggesting alternative forms of life. So I just want to end by saying that these networks suggest that it is the power to relate, network and mediate, the effective registration of hope, desire, and aspiration, the capacity to reveal, share ambiguities and contradictions. This is what will shape the life and politics in Egypt at the beginning of the 21st century. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Now we have Omar Ghazi, a PhD candidate here at the Annenberg School, speaking on Omar al-Mukhtar in the Libyan 2011 uprising, focusing on the iconography. Thank you.
Okay, the title of my presentation is Haunted by Anti-Colonial Memories, Omar al-Mukhtar in the Libyan 2011 uprising. And this presentation is part of my of a larger project, my dissertation project, which looks at mnemonic battles of the uprisings. Basically, I consider the Arab uprisings as this critical incident which, on the one hand, was deemed as historic, and also that, on the other hand, it opened up history for a lot of contestation over what the past means, what symbols from the past, what political meanings they have, and which ones basically to remember and which ones to forget. And at the core of this, basically, contestation is a twofold view of history. There is history that is aspired for, the history that was always supposed to happen that never really did happen, and the history that is the lived history, the actual past, the collection of events that happened in the past. And this is where all these battles of remembering and forgetting take place. So this will, I hope, become clearer by the end of the presentation, because the figure of Omar al-Mukhtar in Libya very much gives an idea of this contestation of history. Omar al-Mukhtar, for those of you who don't know, he's basically an anti-colonial hero in Libya who fought the Italian fascists and colonialists in the 1920s. He was captured by the Italians in 1931, and he was hung in a public square in a town 30 kilometers outside Benghazi. And really, the story of Omar al-Mukhtar is also the story of Libya. He has been contested as a symbol throughout Libyan history, and in many different, basically, identity configurations that have claimed him, but particularly because he hails from the west of Libya, from the region of Cyrenaica, that also has its own identity as opposed to the national Libyan identity. So this is one point of tension where al-Mukhtar is contested between being a symbol of Cyrenaica versus a symbol of Libya. And basically, to organize that history of contestation of what Omar al-Mukhtar means, I talk about how he was used in three different the main turning points, the main points of political rupture in Libyan history, which is the independence in 1951, the al-Qaddafi military coup in 1969, and the current uprising. In 1951, Libya gained its independence. Basically, after Italy lost in World War II, the British came in, and there was a process of negotiation that led to the independence of Libya. And the Al-Sanusi monarchy at the time took over power. And from early on, the figure of Omar al-Mukhtar was contested by whoever wanted to claim nationalism in Libya. One of the main opposition groups at the time against the Al-Sanusi monarchy was called the Omar al-Mukhtar Association. And from the beginning, basically, in 1950, they were forced to change their name and drop Omar al-Mukhtar. And in 1951, the association was banned altogether as the monarchy established its rule in the independent Libya. So I looked at statements and press releases from the Omar al-Mukhtar Association, and I'm just going to read one sentence from 1950 when they announced their name change. So the statement says, addressing the Libyan people, the Omar al-Mukhtar Association announces that due to the deviant circumstances that the nation is going through, the name of this institution has become the National Association. May God preserve this nation and have mercy on Omar al-Mukhtar. And here, the word deviant actually has resonance to the theoretical framework that I'm trying to think of in terms of history, because it signifies that to them they were saying history has begun to take a wrong turn, has begun to take a deviant turn. Moving forward in Libyan history, the Al-Sanusi monarchy definitely used the figure of Al-Mukhtar. They have actually, they were the first to create a memorial for Omar al-Mukhtar in Benghazi in 1960. In 1969, there was a military coup by al-Qaddafi, and from the beginning he positioned himself as an anti-colonial figure, as a part of this corrective movement of history against the pro-Western Sanusi monarchy, and claiming that he represents that national authenticity. So on the 1st of September, he addressed the great Libyan people on national radio, and I also read an excerpt from what he said that eve. He says, "In one fatal and awesome moment, the darkness of the ages was dispelled. From the Turkish domination, then Italian oppression, and finally the era of the reactionary reign. From this moment, Libya is considered a free and sovereign republic under the name of the Arab Libyan Republic. God willing, it shall head toward freedom, glory, unity, and social equality. We shall relive the glory, revive the heritage, and regain our rights and our dignity. You know Omar al-Mukhtar and his legacy of nationalism, Arabism, and Islam. The clock has struck. It is time for work. It's time to move forward." These were the words of al-Qaddafi, and in his first speech, he invoked Omar al-Mukhtar in the same way that I previously talked about. And also, for those of you who are familiar with al-Qaddafi speeches, it's interesting that the last sentence of the speech, "The clock has struck, it is time for work, it is time to move forward," was repeated in one of his last speeches that he gave in Tripoli in February 2011, gesturing towards the same kind of temporal tensions that are going on, promising nationalism, promising basically development and modernization, as he did in '69, he did in 2011. And he also, he is known to have used Omar al-Mukhtar as a symbol in many different ways. He produced the famous Hollywood film, The Lion of the Desert, starring Anthony Quinn. And as relations between Libya and the West improved actually in the 2000s, his use of Omar al-Mukhtar became even more more of a caricature. So these two pictures are taken from his visit to Italy, and we see al-Qaddafi basically in his military uniform, but wearing the picture of Omar al-Mukhtar when he was captured by the Italians, and he brought with him on that visit the 90-year-old son of Omar al-Mukhtar, Muhammad al-Mukhtar, as a sort of prop, or I don't know. And moving to the latest kind of turning point in Libyan history, which obviously is the 2011 uprising. One of the first communication moves of the rebel movement and the opposition movement in Libya is to claim pre-al-Qaddafi symbols. So they changed the flags, they reclaimed Omar al-Mukhtar, and I think about this as a tactic of temporal erasure, where every time there is this discursive effort to discursively erase like the preceding era and to anchor discourse in the previous stage of history. So here we see his picture on flags. The lower image is from a pro-rebel television station. It shows Mukhtar and the lion, because he's known as the lion of the desert. These are all images from Facebook, particularly the official Facebook page of the revolution, and we see like the symbolic weight that is given to Omar al-Mukhtar. He, with his saint-like figure, almost godlike figure, as we see like him in heaven, supposedly. and the image, for example, at the top says, this is not al-Qaddafi's Libya, it's al-Mukhtar's Libya. The second one says words that al-Mukhtar purportedly had said before he died, which is, we do not surrender, we are either victorious or we die. This is another image from the pro-revolution Facebook page, where we have al-Mukhtar sort of addressing the Libyan rebels as his children. On the other hand, this is from a pro-Qaddafi Facebook group, and we see like the contestation of al-Mukhtar right now by the pro-al-Qaddafi figures, pro-al-Qaddafi supporters. So this is an image of Anthony Quinn saying, "What are you doing in Rome?" And this is in reference to the conference of the Friends of Libya or Support Libya that was held in Rome. The other image is also juxtaposing Omar al-Mukhtar with current Libyan politicians. And the quote is actually from a status update in that Facebook group, where it's interesting that now there's also a remembrance of the Libyans who fought alongside the Italians. So saying like, hey, no, even at that anti-colonial moment, we were not united. And as there were traitors back then, there are traitors now. So it asks, were all Libyans fighting the Italians? The bitter truth is that many fought alongside El Duce. And one of the, like a very important also like instance of contestation over al-Mukhtar has to do with his memorial in Benghazi. First, like the other image is of Muhammad al-Mukhtar, the 90-year-old, he's probably older now, but anyway, who from the beginning of the uprising basically voiced support for the rebel movement, for the opposition movement. He went to the battlefront, giving his blessing to the revolution, and he was extensively interviewed by Arab media. The other picture shows the basically memorial of al-Mukhtar in Benghazi. And this memorial has actually a long history. As I mentioned at the beginning, it was first built in 1960 by the Al-Sanusi monarchy. In 1980, al-Qaddafi, without announcing it to Libyans, basically took the body of al-Mukhtar and changed the location of his burial site to the town where he was killed, which is 30 kilometers outside, a small town, 30 kilometers outside Benghazi, in a move that was interpreted at the time as a way to basically monopolize the use of the symbol of al-Mukhtar, and specifically make sure that he is not used for other identity configurations around like the Western Libya and Benghazi. So that was done in 1980. The body was taken to the other location, and in the year 2000, the whole memorial was basically demolished. And this was after riots, like very brief riots that happened in Benghazi at the time after a football game. So a lot of people also interpreted it as kind of revenge against the people of Benghazi. So now, like the site of the memorial, which used to be so important whenever there were visiting leaders, they would go to that site, was completely destroyed. And the Arabic, what it says basically is, did al-Qaddafi demolish the memorial of Omar al-Mukhtar to please his Italian friends, or to avenge the people of Benghazi? This is taken from a pro-revolution web forum. And currently, there's also a lot of contestation because the rebels and the former Libyan opposition are also very, very divided. Recently, for example, in commemorating the 82nd anniversary of the killing of al-Mukhtar, they couldn't agree on a unified service to hold like the ceremony, the anniversary ceremony. There were several that were held. There's a controversy between the people of Benghazi and the people of Slouk, I hope that's how you pronounce it, which is the town outside, and like who gets to keep the body of Al-Mukhtar there. So anyway, just to wrap up with all this, I want to go back to my title, the haunting of anti-colonial memories, and to make the case that like this anti-colonial symbolism is less about colonialism really, and it's more about invoking this originary moment in Libyan nationhood, a moment where the future comes after, and to position like where political actors position oneself in that discursive terrain of the originary moment of anti-colonialism. I'm happy to take questions later about theory because I know I didn't. Thank you.
Now we'll have Nuri Ghana from UCLA, an associate professor of comparative literature, speak. The title of the paper is Venting Still, Tunisian Rap Music Before and After the Revolution.
Thank you. I want to start by thanking Marwan and Marina for inviting us and for putting together this wonderful event. On Thursday, April 21st, 2011, Time magazine released its annual list of the 100 most influential people in the world in 2011. Al General, a 22-year-old Tunisian rapper, made the cut, joining an auspicious list of honorees. The rapper, whose real name is Hamada bin Amr, was ranked 74th in the list, ahead of US President Barack Obama, and of FC Barcelona and Argentina soccer superstar Lionel Messi, as well as of Israel's notorious Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Al General became an overnight sensation when his song Rais Leblad, or Head of State, which he directly addressed to the now deposed President Zine Al Abidine Ben Ali, inspired and incited Tunisians to take to the streets in protest against the massive level of youth unemployment, food and fuel prices, state coercion and corruption, in short, all the byproducts of the neoliberal policies of Ben Ali and his cronies. The song later became the anthem of protesters across the Arab world, I'm being told, from Tunisians' Avenue Bourguiba to Cairo's Tahrir Square and beyond. In what follows, I briefly outline the trajectory of Tunisian rap music from its anecdotal beginnings in the 1990s and its development in the last decade to its more recent explosion in post-revolutionary Tunisia as simultaneously a contestatory and a contested musical genre. Tunisian rap music has initially emerged as a democratizing force, not only in the field of music and arts as a whole, where a great number of marginalized youth have found in it a viable career path and an accessible means to intervene in the highly commercial and competitive fiefdoms of popular music, but it has also emerged in the public sphere where rappers have gradually adopted an activist agenda and spoken loudly in the name of the poor, the underprivileged, conveying their socioeconomic malaises to the powers that be. True, the early 1990s generation of rappers, this is the early generation, they didn't address political issues head-on, and some of the members of this generation were indeed complicit with Ben Ali's regime, as is, I mean, I will mention a lot of weird names, as in the case of Wildeblad, Balti, B4 Clan, T-Man, the Philosophe, among others. But the second generation of rappers who witnessed 9/11, the invasion of Iraq, and Ben Ali's amendment of the constitution to remain in power, they took rap there where everyone else feared to tread, to the realm of socio-political critique. In 2005, for instance, the young rapper Lakai, from the coastal city of Bizerte, organized an anti-government concert in which he tore down an RCD banner. RCD, of course, is Ben Ali's party. The banner was hanged by Ben Ali's party representative over the stage. This earned him a good thrashing after the concert by a handful of policemen. Lakri went underground afterwards, but he continued to be active in Tunisia's largely amateurish and obscure rap scene until he came to prominence with his December 2010 post-revolutionary hit, Touche pas à ma Tunisie, Don't Touch My Tunisia. In the same year, 2005, another Tunisian rapper, Farid El-Extraniero, or he's also known as De La Hoya, released a damning song titled Abad fi Tarkina, literally people in a prison corner, which exposed police brutality and Ben Ali's authoritarian regime. Let's perhaps listen to a little bit of this. Just a little bit, because I have so many clips, and so... So basically, the song begins as follows. We live in a prison corner, our flesh is cut with a knife. Not only that, but the police insult and humiliate us. Poverty, woes, and problems. It's a fish, eat fish world. You can listen to the whole song on YouTube, of course. Farid released the song from Spain, that's why his name is De La Hoya, where he had lived ever since his banishment from Tunisia following a fight with a policeman. When the song reached Tunisia and became an underground hit, it drew governmental attention, which exerted further pressure on rappers and left them with very limited choices. Many went underground, while others chose to stick to commercial rap and steer clear from political subjects. The venture of Tunisian rap music, however, took a completely political turn by the year 2010, the very same year that the United Nations General Assembly proclaimed, following an advice from Ben Ali himself, the International Youth Year. Little did Ben Ali know then that those very youth he championed would instigate his eventual deposition from power after 23 years of authoritarian rule. Of note here is Psychoam's Manipulation, which was released later in the year and which mounted a sweeping attack on Arab nationalists and secularists alike and accused them of involvement in Euro-Zionist plot against Islam. The 15-minute-long song included, among other things, an explicit attack on such public figures as Sawsan Malij, an actress who used to appear routinely on Nasma TV, and Olfa Youssef, the author of the highly contentious book, Hayratu Muslima, The Bewilderment of a Muslim Woman. Malij and Youssef created a public uproar, the former for making an explicit reference to her colleague's penis on a popular live TV show, and the latter for pointing out that the Quran is inconclusive about female inheritance, homosexuality, masturbation, among other hot-button issues. Both ended up filing a defamation suit against Psychoam following the serious toll the song took on their reputation and the death threats they received because of its highly speed cyber reach. Let's just listen to a little bit.
Bienvenue في عصر الفتن في عصر الانحطاط في عصر المحن عصر فيه مخططات قاعدة تصير في حاجات مش مفهومة دونك لازمها تفسير باش تفهم واقع الحاضر لازم تفهم الباسي انا نعطيك التاريخ اللي ما يتقراش في الليسي سياسة المراحل نفهمك ليستوريك ايتاب ايتاب نعطيك لا فريز كرونولوجيك اول مبادرة التاريخ نتاعها كان بعيد بين تيدر هرتزل والسلطان عبد الحميد تيدر هرتزل مؤسسة صهيونية سلطان عبد الحميد يحكم الدولة العثمانية المطلب كان خبيث كان واضح ومحدود يتنازل على فلسطين وتولي دولة لليهود السلطان رفض كانت عنده نخوة بلا أطماع قالهم مستحيل قطعة من أرض الإسلام تتباع ومن غادي بدا تخطيط وبدات المنظمات كل اتحاد والترقي كما تركيا الفتاة منظمات تخدم وتحارب كونتر الدين الأعضاء متاعها الكل كانوا من الماسونيين الهدف متاعها هو الإطاحة بالسلطان وتبدل الإسلام بالقومية والأوطان وكيف
Anyway, I mean, it's really a wonderful kind of thesis about what has been going on in the Arab world since the fall of the Ottoman Empire. Wonderful thesis. It's very long, so 15 minutes. So please listen to it on YouTube if you want to. And I'm not going to offer any translation of the clip because that might take a lot of time. So 3 months after the deposition of Ben Ali, filmmaker Nouri Bouzid also filed a complaint against An-Nahda, or Renaissance Party, because of PSYCHO-M, whom he accuses of issuing a death threat against him in a public rally organized by An-Nahda on April 17, 2011. The lyrics of the song by PSYCHO-M, the song was called La Guerre Psychologique, Psychological War, express PSYCHO-M's passing wish to use a Kalashnikov against all those behind the global media campaign against Islam, including, of course, Nouri Bouzid, whose films allegedly disparage Islam and equate it with terrorism. The song, however, dates back to 2009, a time period in which An-Nahda was not officially in business. In his defense, PSYCHO-M claimed that he used the word Kalashnikov metaphorically to refer to those in power and to the devastating effects of his rhymes. As to Bouzid, he pointed out time and again that he was not troubled by PSYCHO-M as an artist, but by the regressivist Salafist ideologies that inform his songs. Despite his notoriety and the controversial nature of his songs, some would call halal rap, the importance of PSYCHO-M lies in the fact that he clearly upped the ante of public critique and paved the way for the emergence of raw criticisms of Ben Ali's regime. Other rappers soon followed suit, including Gitno, Wajdi Mascot, Wild Kans, and before them all, Al General. And of course, you probably all know Al General, who took the risky task of sending direct messages to Ben Ali twice. The first was titled Sidi Rayis, Mr. President, and was not substantially different from his second, and now greatest claim to national and international fame, Rayis Lebled, head of state. Al General dared the president to step down from his ivory tower in Palace Carthage and go on a real field trip to the gray zones of Tunisia. In the memorable refrain of the song, Al General crudely reports to the president the collective death of his people. Mr. President, your people are dead. In so doing, he basically consigns his presidency to irrelevance, since the people he is supposed to preside over are no more. Just a little 1 minute, because you know the song, I'm sure. Oh, this is another PSYCHO-M, okay. That's the psychology. That's Ben Ali for you. When you want to
رئيس البلاد أنا اليوم نحكي معاك باسمي واسم الشعب الكل اللي عايش في الأحداث 2011 ما زال فما شكون يموت بالجوع حب يخدم باش يعيش لكن صوته مش مسموع اهبط للشارع وشوف العباد ولات وحوش شوف الحاكم بالمتراك تاك ما على بالوش مادام ما فما حد باش يقول له كلمة لا حتى القانون اللي في الدستور نفخه وشرب ماه كل نهار نسمع قضية ركبوها له بالسيف فرطان حاكم يعرف اللي هو عبد نظيف نشوف في الأحلاش تهرب في نسال ما تحاجبين العين زعما ترضى هالبنتك عارف كلامي بك العين عارف مدامك بو ما ترضاش الشر لصغارك الور هذا ميزاج عبارة واحد من صغارك يحكي.
Okay, so again, I think you know the song. I have to skip a little bit because I have one more important song to speak about, and hopefully I'll play a 2-minute clip because I have 5 minutes left, I think. So, Rais Leblad has become now a classic in Tunisian and Arab rap. It has variably been emulated by numerous wannabe MCs, and Al General's international recognition has resulted in what many commentators describe as an overdose of revolutionary and patriotic rap songs. Indeed, rap music has bubbled up like a midnight mushroom in post-revolutionary Tunisia. Ben Ali and his wife, Leila Trabilsi, have excited much of the pent-up ire of post-revolutionary rappers. But with the exception of those who were overtly or covertly the beneficiaries of Ben Ali's regime, like Balti and Digi Costa, most rappers hitched their wagon to the promissory train of the revolution of freedom and dignity. In post-revolutionary Tunisia, all rappers, new and old, have become vociferous claimants to revolutionary credentials. In the months following right after the deposition of Ben Ali, the counter-revolutionary media sought to discredit revolutionary rappers by highlighting their ignorance of music as a profession. This tendency was fueled in part by the alienation felt by many professional pop singers who were supporters of Ben Ali and who came under attack by the revolutionary public sphere. The animosity between professional pop singers and amateur rappers continues to this day, only that the post-revolutionary rap scene has now grown too rich and complex and implicated in too many internal coalition clashes and political alignments to be bothered by the essentialist and envious positions of professional pop singers, especially those who used to be on the side of Ben Ali. There is no question, though, that post-revolutionary rappers have thrived under the threat of marginalization. While some rappers like Al General continued to exert pressure on the successive interim governments, they failed to garner the same attention they garnered under Ben Ali's dictatorship. The freedom of speech from which Tunisians benefit in the wake of the revolution has proven variably counterproductive for rappers, whose raison d'etre continued to be associated in the imagination of most Tunisians with their heroism, that is, with their courage to speak when others dare not. At a time when ordinary Tunisians have become used to publicly critiquing and ridiculing government officials, political rap has gradually become obsolete. Post-revolutionary rappers were not oblivious to this state of affairs, and some of them sought therefore to test the limits of freedom of expression and to usher into a world where nothing is sacred. After the October 23, 2011 elections, in which the Islamic Party Ennahda gained the majority of the seats in the ANC and formed a coalition government with two other secular leftist parties, it's called the Troika, the necessity to test the limits of the newly gained freedom of expression has become urgent, not least because of the perceived fear of the allegedly theocratic potentialities of the Ennahda-led government. What muddied the waters is not only the absence of a clear concept of freedom of expression, but also the incommensurable conflict between electoral legitimacy defended by the Troika and the revolutionary legitimacy defended by the opposition and some civil society actors. Little wonder then that the police and security systems were weakened because of the embattled legitimacy of Sharia, the government they serve. Because of the many tangible security and terrorist threats following the attack on the American embassy in September 2012, the Troika government sought to redeem, rehabilitate, and ennoble the army and police forces. In this context, however, rapper Wald al-Kanz, whose name is Alal Yaqoubi, disseminated through YouTube his controversial video song, Al-Bulisiya Kleb, Cops Are Dogs, in which he attacked the government and the police, stating, and I quote, "To Tunisia I offer a flower, but to the government I offer my dick. And hearts of stone were not afraid. Fuck the police, arrest me or not, I don't care." The chorus refrain of the song reduces cops to barking dogs. It is, however, the moment toward the end of the song when the rapper states that on the day of the Eid, he would like to slaughter a policeman instead of a lamb. that was seen, as an incitement to violence against police forces. I'll play a little, if you allow me. What? This is a winner. There you go.
شدوني على السلك عدوني عالزاطلة بكوا الميمة هزوني ربطية باطلة في قالب غلطة حطوني في وردة تونس نعطيها وردة الحكومة تاخو الكتلة اعطيني الشمع عالسريع عم حبس ما نشدوش كان جا بابا اسمه بوسبيع نحب نتوب نحيت الدروج من المكتوب الحبس ما نشوفوش كان جيت ولد سليم شيبوك يا رئيس يا محامي يا بوليس يا مستشار كيما بكيت وبابا بوك ما شعل فيه النار غير الحومة قندهار الكاس فاضي بديلي صار شيطان رجيم يبديلي مين ابو عياط خدمو بيا السر والليل هزوني للجبانة البارح بيت في الدار الليلة بيت في زنزانة امي ما تبكيش ما كبسونيش البوليس اللي طيحني امه موكلها الحشيش البوليس زي كلاب وانا نقول بيحمين انا نقول بيحمين طلع قول لي بيحمين البوليس زي كلاب البوليس زي كلاب البوليس زي كلاب.
I like this refrain. البوليس هي كلاب وانا نقول نبيح منين انبح يا كلب. So it's very interesting. The cops are dogs and I'm wondering where the barking comes from. Bark dog, bro, bark. So with the Kans, as you can imagine, he was initially of course, arrested because of this song, and initially sentenced to 2 years in prison ferme, which were reduced to 6 months after an appeal before he was released after spending only 6 weeks. So he was really lucky. I'm just concluding here. The Wild El Khan song and trial galvanized the public sphere, but most commentators, including human rights activists, approached the debate through the lenses of the secular versus religious binary, according to which freedom of expression was seen as limitless and as therefore irreducibly aligned with secularism and inimical to Islamism and Islam. Regardless of its explicit and violent content, however, the lyrics of the song are complex and nuanced as they narrate the making of a drug addict and a criminal in post-revolutionary Tunisia. The song did not aim to level criticisms at specific political players, secular or Islamic. Rather, it sought to elaborate a critique of the neoliberal conditions and culture of corruption under which criminals and drug addicts are produced. Of note here is that the successive interim governments in Tunisia, secular and Islamic alike, did not develop a new model of development, Minwal Tanmiya, but continued and even intensified the pre-revolutionary model of underdeveloping the country through loans from the IMF and World Bank. Let me say, though, in conclusion, really, very quickly, that Wild El Khan's song is part of a promissory tendency in post-revolutionary Tunisian rap to speak more to structural problems than to indulge in endless clashes with other rappers or with government figures, even though the song, Cops Are Dogs, does end up, in a sense, to speak about both. Despite its multi-directional venture, the multi-directional venture of Tunisian rap and its growing commercialization, not to mention its continuing obsession with petty party politics, several Tunisian rappers and rap crews have now recognized that the system that needs to be subverted is not reducible to Ben Ali's ancien regime, nor to secular versus Islamic masquerade, but to the ever more globalized paradigm of imperial and financial capitalism, which continues to produce and reproduce all aspects of Tunisian and Arab contemporaneity. Thank you.
Thank you. The last paper of this panel will be delivered by Shana Silverstein, an ethnomusicologist and postdoctoral fellow at the Penn Humanities Forum. The title of her paper is Creative Flow, Music, Genre, and Mobility in the Syrian Revolutionary Public Sphere.
Good morning, everyone. So my paper today is based off of one of the questions that Marwan Marina posed in the conference proposal, which is there a singular or dominant sort of aesthetic here in relation to the Syrian revolution? And my responses were yes, and of course not. And then, well, what is going on here? So I'm trying to get into a little bit of that today with this paper. So the very quick answer, yes. We are perhaps familiar with viral songs such as Haif and Yal Irhala Bashar, or iconic sort of singers, figures like Abba Basit Sarut. And they're performing shabby music in the public protests, in the squares, in Medan. And this circulated and became very much our sense of how it was very symbiotic, basically, with the populist dynamics of that first phase of the Syrian revolution. At the same time, people were also hearing about rap and also a proliferation of anashid, especially amongst the different Islamist groups. But looking at those a little bit closer, we see that popular music itself is not only heterogeneous, it's also highly contested and indicative of the sort of socioeconomic position of the particular people who are performing. The journalist Rania Abu Zaid suggested that rap itself is perhaps not popularly received within Syria, but rather rappers tend to vocalize support for Assad because rap tends to be an urban music genre. That's her claim. And likewise, with Anashid, we see that Sha'abi music itself is not considered part of the kind of political aesthetics that they want to promote in their political vision. So what do we have going on here? I want to look at 3 different case studies that reflect also a sort of temporality in the sense that we are no longer where we were 3 years ago in March, April of 2011, but in fact, many Syrians are now displaced internally, but especially outside the boundaries of what is Syria. And along with that, so popular music is now as much about the history of the revolution through individual stories, through experiences, that is, it's effective, expressive, and political. And so I want to draw on the theoretical framework of mobility studies. It may not necessarily need to go with the case studies that I'm looking at, but if you bear with me a little bit, I'm going to run through what I think it might have to offer. And so mobility studies is something that, yes, discusses migration and the movement of people, but it's something that also incorporates more than what migration studies does in and of itself, which is to consider also goods and objects. At the same time, it, I think, can encapsulate more than globalization, for instance, because it's not only taking into account the economics of what is of the things that are moving. So what mobility studies asks are questions like how are power relations reinforced or contested through socio-spatial discourses and practices. It focuses on the relational dynamics embedded in the movement of people, objects, and ideas. And it brings together different disciplines, sociology, geography, anthropology, in terms of bodies and movement and space. Particularly, I find it compelling because it privileges in-between modes of transiency, movement, and subjectivity. And this is particularly critical for the Syrian experience. Syrians, of course, tending to be on the margin of their host societies, whether it's Lebanon, Jordan, Egypt, or the West. And that leads to the next question of how the process of displacement and becoming a refugee has either demobilized or remobilized a sense of agency, of who a particular individual is within the present moment. So music itself contributes to these questions as a particular object of analysis by which people mediate the relations of body movement and space and their in-between identities in this moment when most of them don't know where they're going to be next year. Also, I think mobilities can help us to think more broadly about public space and publics, to take up one of the central themes that brought us all together here today. Public space enables and encourages mobility. We can consider that in terms of the virtual domain, in terms of social media and whatnot. And then also, in terms of the Syrian revolution, the earlier protests in the different squares and how there was a sense of working together, interconnectedness by different protests happening on each Friday in many different towns and villages, and that being coordinated through text and social media. Mimi Scheller, who's one of the crucial minds behind mobility studies and just recently gave a talk here at PARG. She says, quote, the publicness of public space is closely related to the degree to which it allows for physical and informational mobility within and through it. So she connects the two in a very specific way. And moreover, especially for this paper and the idea of Syrian displacement, or the phenomenon rather of Syrian displacement, quote, what allows a public to emerge as a relation between actors loosened from their immediate social networks and spaces, loosened from their immediate private uses, a kind of opening up of networks and spaces that allows for mixing movement and communication. So I want to take these ideas, especially the last two, and connect them to the three specific case studies in order to ask, how is the Syrian revolutionary public sphere shaped by the mobility of musical objects, aesthetics, and performers? And before going into those specific case studies, just some links then between music, mobility, and genre. How can we look at genre itself, yes, as a practice, but also as a means for identifying broader configurations of power through the emergence or the manipulation or use of new genre styles and artistic figures. This can help us to understand which music goes viral on social media and which does not, and how, quote unquote, revolutionary musicians, if you will, make aesthetic choices. How has musical production impacted the social mobility of individual musicians and shaped the public sphere? And how has the movement of musicians, whether it's refugees or touring artists, shaped and been shaped by their social position? In what ways has the war impacted their social mobility? And finally, how has mass migration impacted the emergence of new musical subjectivities and scenes among middle-class populations in Beirut and Amman, or those in refugee camps in Turkey and Jordan? That's a question that I can't get to today for the sake of time, but something that might be part of a broader picture. So in the paper, the broader paper, what I'm essentially arguing is that musical genre is a marker for certain ideas, concepts, and practices that these individuals have encountered in their experiences of migration, forced or voluntary. Genre and style not only signify broader sets of power relations, but also the mobile and indeterminate conditions of such configurations in the midst of ongoing war and conflict. So the first person that I'd like to discuss today is, he goes by the alias Sakar Holmes, which means Falcon of Homes. It's not his real name. His mom wouldn't let him use his real name, even though he's a middle-aged man, as we probably are familiar with, for the sake of the security of the family who still lives in Homs. And so he's taken up Falcon of Homes, Falcon being a mascot of the Free Syrian Army. And this thumbprint up here is, the Falcon of Homs. So he's from Homs, the old city of Homs. In the 1990s, actually quite a bit ago, he went and studied oud and voice at the Mahad in Damascus. And then after that, left for Chile. And he was very discreet about not telling me what his occupation is in Chile. That led him to go there, but this is, he's been in Chile for about 15 years. So he's established a name for himself there. In addition to his main unidentified occupation, he sings. He's a mutrib, and he plays, and he's been doing this for Haflat for quite some time amongst the diasporic community in Chile. And so he's familiar with shabby music, with tarab, with many kinds of, if you will, local performance traditions. He immediately became involved in the revolution online. About 7 days after the first protests, he opened up a YouTube channel and started to produce his own music. And what his creative process is that he eventually located this a poet, an anonymous poet. He doesn't actually know she's female, but he doesn't know her personally, know her name. And she has a Facebook page, and she uploads her own poetry that is of different political opinions. Interpretations to there. So he takes her poetry and then he sets it to lyrics, or sorry, sets it to composition and performs it on oud and voice. He then compiles a bunch of different images that he collects online, the sorts of images, especially of women and children who have suffered various damages and casualties during the war, and that is the running visual montage that accompanies his original musical works. He has also combined all of this into an album, Al-Hasuriya wa Hariya wa Bas, as you can see there, it's the album cover, and then most recently, he, in the spirit of Bassem Youssef, launched a political satire channel, and he has one episode up, so if you Google Soccer Holmes, you can look. It's an 11-minute clip, so we're not going to go into it today, but I've been told it's quite hilarious and good, worth your time, I would hope. So that's a little bit of how he works. He himself feels that he's not bound to any particular genre. In addition to the various series genres that he's been performing for decades and is very well trained in, he often performs rock and he'll perform salsa. He responds to his audience as any good mutrib does, right? Caters to the taste of the audience. But that audience itself has shifted, and that's what I found particularly interesting, is that because of all of his online work, he has received invitations globally. He has now performed in Qatar, he's performed in Toronto, he's performed in Spain, he was almost going to perform in Michigan, but the visa fell through, and all of this is due to his online activity. So in a sense, he has gained a very concrete, tangible sense of mobility through his artistic work. He claims that the Chilean community tends to be very pro-Assad. So all of this work was actually done in isolation from his immediate social environment. And so in a way that has, if you will, demobilized him, it's put him on the margins or on the periphery of what he previously, before the revolution, was very much representing by being their public performer and various private haflat. So you can see how his position has been both kind of limited and constrained, what he's able to do in his local environment, at the same time, expanded who he is working with and in what capacity and where. And so there's two dimensions of that. One is the very physicality of Chile versus traveling worldwide, and the second is also social media, the fact that he is recombining and assembling the images, the anonymous poetry into his work makes him actually quite a, if you will, mobile artist. Oh, wow, okay, thank you. I will actually go ahead and not play clips in order to be able to discuss the next two. And I'm happy to share them with you, perhaps. He's an excellent artist, and his voice is really quite effective if you're interested. So the second group that I wanted to discuss today is Khabz Dawle, Bread of the State. They are a 4-person group, Anas al-Maghrebi, Bashar Darwish, Mohammed Baz, and Hekmet Kassar. They come from all over Syria, met in Damascus when they were college students at the university, each pursuing different fields and disciplines. One by one, they left Syria. There's quite a few stories, involved, and in fact, their band has become sort of the repository for their stories, for their experiences. They, especially Anas, who's the band leader, narrate very poignant, formative moments of the past 3 years in terms of interactions with the bands, such as he's from the town of Nebek between Damascus and Homs, and he was caught there in the middle of extreme shelling and couldn't leave for days, even though he was trying to actually leave the country in order to relocate to Beirut. And he was in an internet cafe uploading a demo track that we can hear today, and meanwhile also chatting with his friend Baz, who was in Beirut. And so that combination of being in a sort of near-death experience, thank goodness he's still with us today, while speaking with a bandmate and uploading music, has led this band to really look to their music as almost a sort of faith-based enterprise. Anas comes from a conservative religious family, so for him the idea of faith is quite intimate, even though he doesn't consider himself to be a pious and faithful Muslim. It's very interesting to talk with them about their sort of listening history and how they came to the alternative rock and post-rock band that they are today, and a quite successful one now that they've been based in Beirut. They've won all sorts of awards to facilitate the production of their album. They're recording that album right now, so unfortunately we can't hear it. I'm sorry, we can't Skype into their recording studio. That would be quite fun. but look for it in July, eponymous album. But so Anas originally sang Anashid as a teen in Nabak for local ceremonies, and once he moved to Damascus, started to listen and moved through all sorts of phases of listening to 20th century rock, essentially, and is now doing his own form of post-rock that he mixes with Syrian or Arab or Oriental, if you will, Sharqiyya aesthetics. And I won't go into those now for the sake of time, but invite you to read further into the paper for the details of what exactly they're doing with the musical tropes and signifiers. Here's a little bit of their sound from a demo track. In terms of how that narrative, that musical narrative, reflects broader sorts of dynamics, I find it interesting that they have found a sense of autonomy by moving to Beirut. They are no longer supported, so in a sense this is not necessarily a positive thing. They're no longer supported by their kinship networks, but their families, nor by their educational networks, such as being part of a college community. But they're quite autonomous, which means that they're constantly moving apartments. They've lost a lot of weight. They don't really know where their next gig is coming from. Sometimes a workshop here, sometimes a workshop there, but they're making do, and they're excited about the prospects of where their music is going to take them and focus on that. They're about in their mid-20s, I think. But then, so their autonomy renders them paradoxically mobile and immobile, right? On the periphery of Beirut, so a little bit less mobile, but in a sense very much more mobile because they really have to provide for themselves. And also the expansion into the sounds that you just heard also reflect that they have very much left behind their background and where they came from, and are, can listen openly and broadly and be influenced by many by what Beirut has to offer, and happy to go into that in the question and answer session about how being in Beirut has, in the past year, has affected them. Okay, so I was going to talk about a fellow named Khater Dawa. Do that briefly and then wrap up. So Khater Dawa was, I believe he was a mechanic for 8 years from Hama, from Masayef. And then just somebody planted a seed in his head, and he went down to Abu Dhabi for better job prospects, and there met a saxophonist who encouraged him to go to Cairo and train with Nasser Shama. So he has been out of the country for quite a few years now. And is an accomplished musician based in Cairo. He just, like last month, moved to Dusseldorf, Germany, because he got a 3-year grant along with his bandmates to make music, which is terribly exciting. And he also just released, right at the end of February, an album, Tlawa Shams, We Are the Sunrise. He is a very active collaborator with poets and activists in Syria. Essentially, he's worked with poets to write the lyrics for this album and for many, many other songs that he does. He has a YouTube and SoundCloud channels if you're interested in following up on him. When certain poets like Fadi Gomer are detained, he has done memorial concerts and found ways to recognize and also let people know, inform about what is going on. So he's very intimately connected with what is happening in Syria in ways that I think different from the other two artists that I discussed. Unfortunately, we don't have time to go into any of these really rather brilliant tracks, but I think I'll just let you hear his voice. The previous one was very much an electronic version. Let's go to an ode to Holmes, based off of a turn of the century poem.
الحمص يا بلدي وأرض جدودي تجلو رؤى ماضي الوفا المفقود بيضاء في ظل الحجار السودي.
His work is, I think you can see, very compelling in terms of the sort of producing a memory of the revolution that he does by using this poem by Nasib Arida and setting it to a graphic animation of Homs itself, Homs being obviously a central symbol for the revolution. And so by doing so, he expands the revolutionary public sphere through its martyrs, its spiritual centers, and collective ethos, and remobilizes poetic traditions, poetic figures, and the monumental events of the Syrian Revolution. To quickly wrap up so we can move on to questions, which I'm sure everybody is brimming with. Basically, I hope to have showed through these three different sets of musicians how their work circulates very actively in the public sphere and how their own mobility within their host societies is constrained by broader socio-political and economic conditions. Though their aesthetic preferences are shaped by movement across borders between societies and through political currents, the cosmopolitan and open nature of these aesthetic masks their very immobility as refugees and immigrants struggling to find stability in the midst of crisis. Thank you.
We have roughly, I would say, 10 minutes for Q&A if we go into the break, a couple minutes. I think that ideally we can get 2 or 3 questions at a time and then let the panel sort of get at them because we don't have necessarily enough time for everybody to go one through one. So any questions? Comments? Someone should ask a question because I was cutting all their marvelous papers short. So. Yeah. Is there a microphone here? Yeah.
I had a question about the ubiquity of the Omar Mukhtar brigades and how there are these Omar Mukhtar brigades in Palestine and in other countries as well, and festivals around this, and the irony of the figure being represented via Anthony Quinn, and I wondered if you had any kind of thoughts on how this has circulated so widely. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm Ted Zeiter. I'm a drama guy.
There's another question behind here. You could take as well. Yeah, you can take right behind you. Yeah.
Hi, I'm David Jovacchini. I'm the Middle East Studies librarian here at Penn. The fellow was talking about the Egyptian chorus. The phenomenon that you spoke about really resonated with me in the sense that I'd recently been to Morocco and I had an experience similar to this. I'm sure that more study is needed, but I was at the Casablanca Book Fair and I encountered an organization there whose stated purpose was to preserve Musique Andalusia. And indeed, they had done this. They had captured archival recordings of the Casablanca scene in the 1950s, but they also had current recordings. And they invited me to come to one of their jam sessions. And when I went to the jam session, they gave out instruments to people. They said, "Well, you play a little bit of oud, don't you?" And I said, "Yes." So they gave me an oud, and it was a whole community, kids, older people there, and the songs that they sang were not specifically, Musique Andalusia. It was more of a community thing, and they had taken, evidently, what they had obviously done was taken the music of this ancient art form and adapted it for their own means, and in terms of lyrics as well. So I think this is a phenomenon which is not limited to Egypt. So.
Thanks. Okay. Is there one more?
Yeah, Tarek Alaris, and I come from comparative literature, and my question is comparative. One of the things, you've showed us a lot of clips from Tunisian rap to the Syrian songs, and even the choir. What I find is missing is a comparative framework, because we cannot just simply think about these and try to find a theoretical framework and whether we find it or not. But we also need to think about these songs comparatively. And in the case of Tunis, Eminem, the American rapper, is all over these songs. I mean, even one of them is called Emino. Reis Leblad is in direct communication with Mush, which is one of the songs where Eminem critiques Bush and the war in Iraq. So we need to also situate these within the Arab Spring and Arabic public sphere, but we also need to kind of bring them in conversation with a larger kind of youth culture, music culture that, that allows us to talk about what's happening in the Arab world with the Arab Uprising in a larger context, in a global context.
Amar, would you like to speak to the first question, and then?
Okay. Yeah, like I think a lot of anti-colonial symbols are shared across the Arab world. Like basically, there's a poem by Ahmad Shawqi about Omar al-Mukhtar early on. So he is very much a figure that has been important in even constructing like this pan-Arab identity against colonialism at like in the early 20th century. So there is like, it resonates specifically with like in Palestine there are streets called Omar al-Mukhtar, and in this like anti-colonial imaginary. And like in Iraq, when Saddam Hussein was killed, especially that he was hung, and there's this moment of hanging, there's also like a lot of pro-Saddam supporters who compare him to Omar al-Mukhtar. So he resonated in many different places across time.
Akin, did you want to speak to the?
I mean, one thing to, the comparative framework. I think the idea of circulations really captures this idea effectively, and part of what my presentation was about circulations, because these like songs and improvisations really change a lot according sometimes to the circulations of the musicians and non-musicians in different cities. So the choir project song, the song I show actually, it completely changed. Starts, for example, with this kind of like, this is how it's performed, and the audience laughed. This kind of, it was actually developed in Berlin when Egyptians and people in Berlin were working together, and when it was performed in Cairo, it has this. So, but there are limitations, time limitations. But yeah.
Things that just want to say that after I heard your song last week, it gave me a reason why people were singing like this. That idea of drama.
Thank you.
Because although Morocco was not involved in the Arab Spring, the Moroccan people were certainly not involved.
Thank you.
Can I say I completely agree with Tarek comments, but I think if you've been dealing with Marwan, he gave you a specific agenda. But anyway, in the longer articles I published, I really deal with the comparative context. And I just say briefly, in terms of what is important for Tunisian rappers, like in the Arab sphere, it's Lotfi Double Canon, the Algerian rapper, has a lot of influence on Tunisian rapper, and the other influence from the United States is Tupac Shakur. So if you go and ask all these rappers who influenced you, they either mentioned Lotfi Double Canon or Tupac Shakur. So they're very important. Yeah.
Okay, we are sadly out of time. Let's thank the panel, and if you have questions, I'm sure they'll be available to speak to you.